The grand ballroom of Valdoria Palace sparkled under the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. But beneath the glittering surface, tension crackled like electricity in the air. Princess Isabella stood at the entrance, her emerald gown flowing behind her as she surveyed the scene before her. Tonight was supposed to be the most important state banquet of the year, welcoming the diplomatic delegation from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria, Lady Margaret. The former actress who had married into the royal family just 2 years prior glided through the crowd with practiced grace. Her burgundy dress was stunning, but Isabella noticed how she seemed to position herself at the center of every conversation, drawing attention away from the visiting dignitaries. This wasn't the first time Margaret had overstepped her bounds, and Isabella's patience was wearing thin. Queen Helena, Isabella's mother, had been ill for months, leaving much of the royal duties to fall on Isabella's shoulders. As the eldest daughter and heir apparent, she had worked tirelessly to maintain the kingdom's reputation and diplomatic relationships. But Margaret's constant need for the spotlight was becoming a serious problem. The evening began smoothly enough. The royal orchestra played beautiful melodies as guests mingled in the reception hall. Prince Alexander, Isabella's younger brother and Margaret's husband, looked uncomfortable as he watched his wife command attention from a group of foreign ambassadors. He caught Isabella's eye across the room and gave her a worried look that spoke volumes. As the dinner bell chimed, signaling time to move to the dining hall, Isabella noticed Margaret, making her way toward the head table, where only the most senior royals and distinguished guests were seated. This was completely against protocol. Margaret's assigned seat was at the secondary table with the other newer family members and lesser dignitaries. Isabella's lady-in-waiting, Sophia, appeared at her side with a concerned expression. "Your Highness," she whispered quietly, "Lady Margaret has instructed the staff to change her place card. She's attempting to sit between the Astorian Prime Minister and the Archbishop." The audacity took Isabella's breath away. That particular seating arrangement had been carefully planned for weeks, taking into account delicate political relationships and centuries of royal protocol. For Margaret to simply decide she deserved a more prominent position showed a complete disregard for tradition and diplomacy. Isabella watched as Margaret approached the head table, her confident smile never wavering. The other guests began to notice the commotion as servers looked confused about the seating arrangements. The Astorian delegation exchanged puzzled glances, clearly unsure about the protocol breach they were witnessing. This was the moment Isabella had been dreading but knew would eventually come. Margaret's behavior had been escalating for months, interrupting important meetings, speaking out of turn during ceremonies, and constantly pushing boundaries. But tonight, in front of crucial international guests, Isabella could not allow this disruption to continue. Taking a deep breath, Isabella stepped forward, her royal training and natural authority evident in every movement. The conversations around her began to quiet as people sensed something significant was about to happen. Prince Alexander looked mortified as he realized what his wife was attempting to do. Lady Margaret, Isabella called out in a clear, carrying voice that commanded attention throughout the dining hall. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward the unfolding drama. The musicians continued playing softly, but even they seemed to sense the tension in the air. Margaret turned, her smile faltering slightly as she saw the determined expression on Isabella's face. For the first time that evening, she seemed to realize that her actions might have consequences. The weight of centuries of royal tradition and protocol pressed down on the moment, and everyone in the room understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Isabella's heart pounded as she prepared to make a decision that would change the dynamics of the royal family forever. The visiting dignitaries watched with fascination. The palace staff held their breath, and Prince Alexander closed his eyes, as if preparing for impact. The stage was set for a confrontation that would be talked about in royal circles for years to come. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as Isabella approached Margaret with measured steps. Her training in diplomacy and statecraft guided her movements, but her emotions churned beneath the surface. She could feel the eyes of every guest, every servant, every member of the press corps stationed discreetly around the room. Lady Margaret, Isabella began again, her voice carrying the authority of generations of royal blood. I believe there has been some confusion regarding the seating arrangements this evening. Margaret's face flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. Oh, Princess Isabella, I was just ensuring our distinguished guests receive the proper attention they deserve. Surely you understand the importance of making our visitors feel welcome. The comment was cleverly phrased, making it seem as though Margaret was acting in the kingdom's best interests rather than pursuing her own agenda. But Isabella had dealt with enough political maneuvering to recognize the tactic. Around them, the guests shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to intervene or simply observe. Prince Alexander finally stepped forward, his face pale but determined. Margaret, darling, perhaps we should return to our assigned seats. The protocol exists for good reasons. His voice carried a plea that only those closest to him could detect. But Margaret was not ready to back down. She had spent 2 years feeling relegated to the sidelines, attending ribbon cuttings and charity tea parties, while the real decisions were made without her input. Tonight felt like her opportunity to claim her rightful place in the royal hierarchy. With respect, Alexander, I am a member of this family now. I have every right to participate fully in state functions. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, and Isabella could see she was drawing strength from the attention of the crowd. The Asturian Prime Minister, a distinguished woman in her 60s, watched the exchange with keen interest. She had attended numerous royal functions across Europe and understood that what was happening here was far from normal protocol. Her aide whispered something in her ear, probably advising her on proper diplomatic etiquette for such an unusual situation. Isabella realized that every second this confrontation continued, it reflected poorly on Valdoria's royal family and government. International relationships could be damaged by such public displays of disunity. She needed to end this quickly, but decisively. Lady Margaret, Isabella said, stepping closer and lowering her voice to a tone that was both respectful and unmistakably firm. Tonight's seating arrangements were personally approved by Her Majesty the Queen before her illness. To alter them would be to disrespect not only our guests, but also the crown itself. The mention of Queen Helena's authority struck home. Even Margaret could not argue against the direct wishes of the reigning monarch. But Isabella could see in her eyes that she was searching for another angle, another way to maintain her position. Lord Chancellor Edmund, the elderly advisor who had served the royal family for decades, approached the group quietly. His presence added another layer of official weight to the situation. He carried with him a folder containing the official seating charts. Signed and sealed with the royal seal, Your Royal Highness. He addressed Isabella with a slight bow. The formal arrangements have been set according to tradition and diplomatic protocol. The Asturian delegation has been briefed on these arrangements as part of their advanced preparations. Margaret's face grew redder as she realized the full extent of her miscalculation. She had not simply been making a spontaneous decision about where to sit. She was attempting to override carefully planned diplomatic protocol that had been communicated to foreign governments. The young woman who served as Margaret's personal assistant appeared at her elbow, looking mortified. My lady, she whispered urgently, perhaps I misunderstood your instructions earlier. Let me escort you to your proper place. This offered Margaret a graceful way to retreat, suggesting that the entire incident had been based on a miscommunication rather than deliberate defiance. It was exactly the kind of diplomatic solution that Isabella might have offered herself, but coming from Margaret's own staff, it carried more weight. For a moment, Margaret seemed to consider taking the offered escape route, but then her eyes swept across the room, taking in the hundreds of faces watching her every move. The cameras discreetly recording everything. The foreign dignitaries who would carry this story back to their own countries, instead of backing down. Margaret made a decision that surprised everyone, including Isabella. She smiled broadly and addressed the entire room in a clear, confident voice that carried to every corner of the grand dining hall. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Margaret announced with theatrical flair, I believe we are all here tonight to celebrate the strong bonds between our kingdoms and to honor the spirit of diplomatic friendship that transcends rigid formalities. The boldness of her move sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. She was essentially making a public speech without permission. addressing foreign dignitaries as if she held official authority, and challenging the very foundations of royal protocol in front of hundreds of witnesses. Isabella felt her training take over as years of preparation for moments like this kicked in. She could not allow Margaret to continue this performance. But she also could not create an international incident by forcibly removing a family member in front of diplomatic guests. The delicate balance required every ounce of her political skill. "How thoughtful of you to express such sentiments," Isabella replied smoothly, moving to stand beside Margaret in a way that appeared supportive but actually positioned her to take control of the situation. "I'm certain our guests appreciate your enthusiasm for international friendship." The Asturian Prime Minister stepped forward, recognizing both the diplomatic crisis and the opportunity to help resolve it gracefully. "Your Royal Highness," she addressed Isabella directly, "the delegation from Astoria is honored to be received with such warmth by all members of the Valdorian royal family. We understand that passion for diplomatic relations sometimes transcends formal arrangements." Words were carefully chosen to acknowledge Margaret's breach of protocol while clearly indicating that she recognized Isabella as the proper authority in the situation. It was a masterful piece of diplomacy that gave Isabella the opening she needed. "Prime Minister, your understanding and grace honor both our kingdoms," Isabella responded. "Perhaps Lady Margaret could join me in personally welcoming each member of your delegation before we proceed to dinner. I would value her assistance in ensuring every guest feels properly honored." The suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity. It gave Margaret an important role to play, while removing her from the seating dispute and placing her firmly under Isabella's direct supervision. Prince Alexander looked relieved as he recognized his sister's diplomatic skill in action. Margaret hesitated, clearly aware that accepting Isabella's offer would mean abandoning her bid for the head table, but also recognizing that refusing would make her appear ungracious and contrary to the interests of international relations that she had just claimed to champion. The palace photographer, who had been discreetly documenting the evening, captured the moment perfectly as the two women stood together, representing different generations and philosophies within the royal family. The image would later become iconic, symbolizing the delicate balance between tradition and change within modern monarchy. Lady Caroline, the Queen's elderly cousin, an unofficial keeper of royal traditions, watched from her seat with keen interest. She had witnessed decades of palace intrigue and recognized both the severity of Margaret's transgression and the elegance of Isabella's solution. Her slight nod of approval carried significant weight among the traditional members of the royal circle. "I would be delighted to assist Princess Isabella in welcoming our distinguished guests," Margaret finally responded, her smile never wavering despite the clear defeat she had just experienced. To her credit, she managed to make it sound as though this had been her intention all along. The two women began moving through the crowd together, with Isabella making formal introductions and Margaret offering gracious compliments to each dignitary. To outside observers, they appeared to be working in perfect harmony, but the underlying tension was evident to anyone who understood royal dynamics. As they approached the elderly Duke of Astoria, a man known for his sharp wit and political acumen, he smiled knowingly at both women. "Princess Isabella, Lady Margaret, what a pleasure to witness such collaborative leadership. In Astoria, we have a saying, strong kingdoms are built on strong partnerships, even when those partnerships require negotiation." His comment was diplomatically phrased, but clearly indicated that he understood exactly what had just transpired. Foreign dignitaries were not naive about palace politics, and many had witnessed similar power struggles within their own royal families. The orchestra, which had continued playing softly throughout the confrontation, now transitioned to the formal dinner fanfare. This was Isabella's cue to guide everyone toward their assigned seats, and she seized the opportunity to bring the crisis to its conclusion. "Distinguished guests," she announced to the room, "dinner is now served. Lady Margaret and I have been delighted to welcome you personally, and now we invite you to enjoy an evening celebrating the enduring friendship between our nations." The crowd began moving toward the dining hall, but the real test was yet to come. Margaret still had not actually taken her assigned seat, and Isabella knew that the next few minutes would determine whether this diplomatic crisis had been truly resolved or merely postponed. As the guests filed into the magnificent dining hall, Isabella maintained her position near Margaret, while subtly guiding the flow of people toward their designated seats. The dining room was a masterpiece of royal grandeur. With golden place settings reflecting the light from enormous crystal chandeliers, and elaborate floral arrangements that had taken the palace staff days to perfect, Prince Alexander approached his wife and sister. His diplomatic training evident in his calm demeanor despite the stress of the situation. "The Astorian delegation seems genuinely pleased with their reception," he commented, offering both women a way to focus on the positive aspects of the evening. Rather than their disagreement, Margaret nodded graciously. But Isabella could see the calculation in her eyes. She was clearly still hoping to find a way to elevate her position for the dinner itself. As they reached the dining hall, Margaret slowed her pace, allowing other guests to move ahead while she seemed to study the elaborate table settings. "The arrangements are truly magnificent," Margaret observed, her tone carefully neutral. "I do hope our guests understand the significance of each placement. Sometimes visitors aren't familiar with our traditional protocols." It was another attempt to suggest that the seating arrangements might need modification, this time framed as concern for the guests' comfort rather than her own ambition. Isabella recognized the strategy immediately. "Our diplomatic staff has worked closely with their Astorian counterparts to ensure perfect understanding of our customs," Isabella replied smoothly. In fact, Prime Minister Cordelia specifically requested to be seated near Lord Chancellor Edmund so they could discuss the upcoming trade negotiations. This was perfectly true, and it effectively blocked any suggestion that the arrangements were anything less than ideal for all parties involved. Margaret's expression showed she understood that her options were becoming increasingly limited. Lady Sophia appeared at Isabella's elbow with impeccable timing, carrying a small leather portfolio. "Your Royal Highness," she said quietly, "the Palace Secretariat has prepared the evening's program. Would you like to review the speaking order before we begin?" The portfolio contained the detailed schedule for the evening, including the specific timing for toasts, speeches, and entertainment. More importantly, it provided Isabella with another tool for managing the situation diplomatically. "Excellent," Isabella replied, opening the portfolio to reveal the carefully planned timeline. "Lady Margaret, perhaps you would like to review this as well, since you'll be presenting the Cultural Appreciation Award to the Astorian artists later this evening." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. This was the first she had heard of any such presentation, and she realized immediately that Isabella was offering her a significant role in the evening's proceedings, but one that would take place after dinner. When the seating controversy would be resolved, "I would be honored," Margaret replied, her voice showing the first genuine warmth of the evening. The Cultural Appreciation Award was actually an important tradition, typically presented by a senior member of the royal family to visiting artists and performers. It was a meaningful gesture that would give Margaret a prominent moment without disrupting the diplomatic protocols. Prince Alexander looked relieved as he recognized the compromise taking shape. His sister had found a way to give his wife an important role while maintaining proper protocol and avoiding international embarrassment. The Duchess of Valdoria, Queen Helena's sister, and a formidable figure in royal circles, had been observing the entire situation with keen interest. She approached the group with the measured pace of someone who had navigated decades of palace politics. "Princess Isabella," she said with a warm smile, "I've been speaking with the Astorian cultural attaché about their remarkable young musicians. Lady Margaret, your background in the arts makes you the perfect choice to honor their contributions this evening." The endorsement from the Duchess carried enormous weight, effectively legitimizing Isabella's solution and making it clear to everyone present that the royal family was united in supporting this arrangement. Margaret straightened slightly, clearly pleased by both the recognition of her artistic background and the validation from such a senior family member. "I'm deeply honored by the opportunity to represent our family's appreciation for artistic excellence," she replied. As the last of the guests found their way to their assigned seats, Isabella gestured toward the table where Margaret's place card waited. "Shall we take our seats? I believe the first course is about to be served." The moment of truth had arrived. Margaret looked once more toward the head table, where she had originally hoped to sit, then at her own assigned place among the secondary royal family members and cultural dignitaries. For a few seconds, the entire evening hung in the balance. Then Margaret smiled graciously and moved toward her assigned seat. Of course. I'm looking forward to meeting the other cultural representatives. It will be wonderful to discuss their work before the presentation ceremony. A collective sigh of relief seemed to flow through the royal staff members positioned around the room. The crisis had been resolved without international incident, and the evening could proceed as planned. But as Isabella took her own seat at the head table, she couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the end of Margaret's challenges to royal protocol, or simply the conclusion of this particular battle in what might prove to be a longer campaign. The dinner proceeded magnificently, with each course served to perfection and conversations flowing smoothly between the Valdorian and Asturian delegations. Isabella watched carefully as Margaret engaged warmly with the cultural representatives at her table, discussing art, theater, and music with genuine enthusiasm. For the first time that evening, Margaret seemed completely in her element. Between the third and fourth courses, Isabella caught sight of her mother's private secretary approaching discreetly. Queen Helena, though too ill to attend the banquet, was being kept informed of the evening's events. The secretary handed Isabella a small, sealed note written in the Queen's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Isabella," the note read, "Lord Edmund has briefed me on tonight's difficulties. Your handling of the situation shows the wisdom and grace that will serve you well as Queen. However, consider whether Lady Margaret's talents might be better utilized in an official capacity rather than leaving her to create her own opportunities. A guided path often proves more successful than a restrictive one." The Queen's message was characteristically insightful. Rather than simply managing Margaret's ambitious tendencies, perhaps it would be wiser to channel them constructively. Isabella folded the note thoughtfully as she considered the possibilities. The main courses concluded, and the time approached for the evening's ceremonial presentations. Isabella rose to address the gathering, her voice carrying clearly through the grand dining hall as conversations quieted in anticipation. "Distinguished guests, members of the diplomatic corps, and dear friends," she began. "Tonight, we celebrate not only the bonds between our nations, but also the cultural richness that makes such partnerships meaningful. It gives me great pleasure to invite Lady Margaret to present this evening's Cultural Appreciation Awards." The applause was warm and genuine as Margaret rose from her seat. She had spent the dinner hour building rapport with the artists and performers, and her enthusiasm for their work was evident to everyone present. This was clearly a role that suited her perfectly. "Thank you, Princess Isabella," Margaret said as she moved to the presentation podium. "Tonight, I have had the privilege of meeting some of Asturia's most talented artists, and I am continually amazed by the power of creativity to bridge differences and build understanding between peoples." Her speech was eloquent and heartfelt, drawing on her own background in theater to connect with the recipients and the broader audience. As she presented awards to the musicians, painters, and writers in the Asturian delegation, Margaret displayed a natural charisma and genuine passion that commanded respect. The Asturian Prime Minister leaned toward Isabella during the ceremony. "Lady Margaret is quite remarkable," she commented quietly. "Her knowledge of the arts is impressive. Her ability to connect with our cultural representatives is exactly what we hoped for in this exchange." Isabella smiled, realizing that her mother's advice was already proving wise. Margaret's desire for prominence wasn't necessarily problematic, it was simply misdirected. In the right context, with the proper role, her ambition and talents could serve the kingdom well. As the presentations concluded, the elderly Duke of Astoria requested permission to speak. He rose slowly, his years of diplomatic experience evident in his measured words. "Your Royal Highnesses. Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I have attended many state functions throughout my career, but tonight has been particularly memorable. We have witnessed not only gracious hospitality, but also the kind of thoughtful collaboration that makes diplomatic relationships strong and enduring." Words carried subtle meaning that the experienced diplomats in the room understood perfectly. He was acknowledging both the earlier tension and its successful resolution, praising the royal family's ability to handle internal dynamics while maintaining international dignity. The orchestra began, playing the traditional closing melodies, as guests prepared to move to the reception hall for coffee and informal conversation. Isabella used this natural transition to approach Margaret privately. "Your presentation was absolutely beautiful," Isabella said sincerely. "The artists were clearly moved by your words, and the diplomatic value of your connections with them tonight cannot be overstated." Margaret's smile was genuine for the first time all evening. "Thank you, Isabella. I truly enjoyed meeting them and learning about their work. Perhaps there might be opportunities to expand cultural exchanges in the future." This was exactly the opening Isabella had been hoping for. Actually, Mother has been considering creating a new position, a cultural ambassador, a role that would involve coordinating artistic exchanges, hosting cultural events, and representing the kingdom at international arts festivals. Someone with your background and passion would be ideal for such a position. Margaret's eyes widened with surprise and genuine excitement. "Do you really think? Would that be something the Queen might consider?" "I think tonight's success makes a compelling case," Isabella replied. "But such a role would require working within established diplomatic protocols and coordinating closely with the Foreign Office. It would be a significant responsibility." The implication was clear. Margaret could have the prominence and meaningful work she craved, but it would come with expectations of professional behavior and respect for royal protocols. It was an offer that addressed her ambitions while ensuring they would be channeled constructively. Prince Alexander approached them as the last of the dinner guests prepared to leave the dining hall. His relief at the evening's successful conclusion was evident in his relaxed demeanor. "I wanted to thank you both," he said quietly. "Tonight could have been a disaster, but instead, it ended up showcasing the best of our family's ability to work together. Margaret, your presentation was absolutely perfect." As they prepared to join the guests in the reception hall for the evening's final phase, Isabella reflected on the lessons of the night. Sometimes the greatest diplomatic challenges came not from foreign adversaries, but from within one's own family. And the solutions required the same careful balance of firmness and grace that characterized successful international relations. The reception hall buzzed with animated conversation as guests mingled over coffee and delicate pastries. The formal tensions of the dinner hour had given way to more relaxed interactions, and Isabella was pleased to see genuine friendships forming between the Valdorian and Astorian delegations. Margaret had become the center of an enthusiastic group discussing plans for a joint arts festival, her earlier confrontational energy now channeled into productive collaboration. She spoke passionately about showcasing emerging artists from both kingdoms, and her ideas were met with genuine enthusiasm from the cultural attaches. Lady Caroline approached Isabella with a knowing smile. "Your handling of tonight's situation was masterful, my dear. But more importantly, I think you've discovered something valuable about Lady Margaret's true potential. Sometimes the most challenging family members simply need the right outlet for their energies." The observation was astute. Margaret's behavior tonight had not been malicious, but rather the result of feeling marginalized and seeking purpose within the royal structure. By providing her with meaningful work that utilized her genuine talents, the family could transform a source of tension into an asset. The Astorian Prime Minister joined their conversation, carrying a cup of the palace's famous royal blend coffee. "Princess Isabella, I wanted to express my genuine appreciation for tonight's proceedings. The cultural presentations were particularly meaningful, and I believe Lady Margaret has opened doors for some exciting collaborative projects." She paused thoughtfully before continuing. "In my experience, the strongest royal families are those that find ways to utilize every member's unique strengths rather than expecting everyone to fit the same traditional mold. Tonight's demonstration of that principle was quite remarkable." Her words carried the weight of decades in international diplomacy and served as validation of Isabella's approach to the evening's challenges. It was gratifying to know that what could have been a diplomatic disaster had instead become an example of effective leadership. Prince Alexander excused himself from his conversation with the Astorian trade minister and approached the group. "Isabella, I wanted you to know that Margaret and I discussed the cultural ambassador position on our way here. She's incredibly excited about the possibility and wants to begin preparing a formal proposal for Mother's consideration." The speed with which Margaret had embraced the opportunity confirmed Isabella's instincts about her motivations. She hadn't been seeking conflict for its own sake, but rather recognition and meaningful responsibility. Providing those things in a constructive context seemed to have resolved the underlying issues. Immediately, as the evening wound down and guests began taking their leave, the Astorian delegation made a point of thanking both Isabella and Margaret personally. The young musicians who had received awards from Margaret seemed particularly taken with her plans for expanded cultural exchange programs. Lady Margaret, the lead violinist, said earnestly, "Your vision for connecting young artists across kingdoms is exactly what our generation needs. We would be honored to participate in any programs you develop." The genuine enthusiasm in his voice was echoed by his fellow artists, and Isabella could see how moved Margaret was by their response. This was clearly the kind of work that spoke to her heart and utilized her natural talents effectively. Lord Chancellor Edmund, who had remained diplomatically in the background during most of the evening's drama, approached Isabella as the last guests departed. "Your Royal Highness," he said with a slight bow, "Queen Helena will be pleased to hear that tonight proceeded so successfully. May I suggest that we schedule a meeting tomorrow to discuss formalizing the cultural ambassador position? I believe it could serve both the kingdom's interests and family harmony quite well." The suggestion confirmed that Isabella's solution had the support of the royal establishment. Creating an official role for Margaret would provide structure for her contributions while ensuring they remained aligned with broader diplomatic goals as the palace staff began the enormous task of cleaning up after the banquet. Isabella found herself alone with Margaret and Alexander in the now quiet reception hall. The contrast with the evening's earlier tension was remarkable. "I owe you both an apology," Margaret said quietly. "I realize now that my behavior tonight was inappropriate. I was so focused on wanting to contribute meaningfully that I lost sight of the importance of protocol and teamwork." Her acknowledgement of the problem was gracious and seemed genuinely heartfelt. Isabella was impressed by Margaret's willingness to take responsibility for her actions rather than making excuses or deflecting blame. "Margaret," Isabella replied warmly, "your passion for the kingdom's cultural life is exactly what we need. Tonight showed that when we work together and respect each other's roles, we can accomplish remarkable things. I think the cultural ambassador position could be perfect for channeling your talents in a way that serves everyone's interests." Looked relieved and proud as he watched his wife and sister find common ground. "I've always believed that our family's strength comes from our diversity of talents and perspectives. Tonight proved that we can work through any challenge when we approach it with good faith and mutual respect." As they prepared to leave the palace and return to their respective residences, Isabella reflected on the evening's lessons. The crisis that had seemed so threatening just hours earlier had ultimately revealed opportunities for growth and positive change. Margaret's ambition, when properly directed, could indeed serve the kingdom well. The next morning's newspapers would report on the successful state banquet and the promising cultural initiatives announced during the evening. The internal family dynamics that had nearly created an international incident would remain private, but their resolution had strengthened rather than weakened the royal family's effectiveness. Most importantly, Isabella had gained valuable experience in managing complex personal and political dynamics under pressure. These skills would serve her well as she prepared for her eventual role as queen, and tonight's success gave her confidence that she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. The palace settled into peaceful quiet as the staff completed their work and the royal family retired for the evening, each member satisfied that they had not only survived a potential crisis, but had emerged stronger and more united than before.